Hello, everyone, and welcome to the maiden episode of the Cyber Voice podcast with Jumi. I am your host, Jumi, and on this podcast, we'll be moving beyond the technical because we already have a lot of technical podcasts in cybersecurity. We'll be diving into real conversations with the defenders defending the cyber space. And I also want you to know that on this podcast, we'll be having experts, we'll be having cybersecurity leaders, even down to the enthusiasts. So nobody is exempted from this podcast. We'll be hearing real stories. We'll be moving beyond the technicals. We'll be moving beyond the breaches and all of that. So sit down, relax, maybe grab a cup of coffee, and then hear what we have to say on this first episode on the Cyber Voice. I'm so excited on this journey, to start this journey. And with me here today is a very big personality. Um, she has a very interesting background because she moved from the non-technical to the technical space. I mean, when I say non-technical, she moved from a social science background to becoming a cybersecurity leader. I have here with me today Tracy Z Maleeff. Tracy is the senior consultant. She called herself InfoSec Shepherd of the InfoShepherd Intelligence LLC in the United States of America. And she is a senior lady in cybersecurity. Tracy has quite an interesting background, like I've mentioned. She once worked in her previous life. In her previous life, she once worked as a librarian in different places. But right now, she has bagged enough of experience in cybersecurity. I mean, years of experience in cybersecurity, working across different sectors, such as the media, the energy, even down to the pharmaceutical. She's got a lot of experience in her portfolio. She has a deep expertise in threat intelligence, like myself, and I'm so happy to have Tracy on the podcast today. Tracy, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I'm really, really grateful because not so many people will want to identify with, a startup like this. So I am so happy to have you here with me. And then I'm very sure that we are going to have a good and a pleasant conversation. All right. Thank you so much, Tracy. I love your big smile, though. Yeah. So for the for today's episode, the theme for today's episode is inside the trenches. What cybersecurity looks like at the front line. And the angle that we're going to be exploring today will be a ground level conversation about what defenders and what analysts actually experience day to day, from the alerts to the trade offs to the fatigue to the judgment calls, when things happen, and then behind the scene of what happened. And that's the angle that we are going to move into today while we hear Tracy answer our questions. So, Tracy, I have 7 questions for you. I've got 5 team questions, and I've got 2 additional questions, which are our signatory questions on this podcast. So I'm going to start with the first one. Please, I want you to answer based on your experience, based on the real thing that has happened in your role, in your experience in cybersecurity. All right, on to the first one. Number one, so when people hear cybersecurity, they think of tools and attack. Of course, that's what makes the major headlines. But what does a typical day in the trenches? I mean, when I say trenches here, I mean cybersecurity. What does a typical day in the trenches, I mean cybersecurity, means for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I actually have a lot of varied experience, so I can give you a snippet of what a SOC analyst day in the life looks like, what threat intelligence looks like, and what GRC looks like. Again, just from my own experience, it's not going to necessarily be the same for other people. But first, I want to say that all three roles that I'm going to talk about all require, at least for me anyway, all require checking the news first thing in the morning. And I know you're thinking, well, if it's threat intelligence, that makes sense. But for SOC analyst and for GRC, you really need to know what's going on in in the world, because it could impact your company or it could impact your information security work. So you first need to understand, is there anything new that popped up that I should be aware of? You should also anticipate being asked questions about things, usually from the C-suite. Uh, and it's best if you at least have some sort of an idea of what's going on in the news, and you can follow it up later with some in-depth research. But it's a good idea just to face each morning knowing what's going on in the world, figuring out, does this impact me or an organization, etc. And then the other thing is that all three roles require is those interpersonal skills, communication skills. you're going to be need you're going to need to work with teammates, not only in your own department but in other departments. You'll need to collaborate and work with other departments,
Yeah.
so you need to have some
Okay.
skills for that. So for a SOC analyst, I would come in, I would check the news, I would
Mm.
review logs. You would review, especially if it was a Monday morning, seeing what happened over the weekend. There was
Mhm.
somebody on call over the weekend, but you still want to go in and see if there's any thing to fix. You know, go through the tickets, things like that. I also did a lot of phishing triage. When employees would report an email as phishing, I would investigate it. If there was a certain threshold, I would say at least 10 or more of the same kind of fish, that would require then a little bit deeper investigation. Uh, a unique part to my SOC analyst job is that I was able to spend um, about 2 hours, 1.5, 2 hours each day on threat intelligence. And what
Okay.
that looked like for me as a SOC analyst was doing some dark web searches, um, other research, looking at the social media for the company, and were there any threats or something suspicious going on, and just kind of combing to see if the company was mentioned in any way. And there were times when I found things like protests being scheduled in a town where the company had a location. So I would, document all that, screenshot everything, and then pass it along. Um, and what else you also need to do as a SOC analyst, it may not have been every day, but I used to create user guides for my fellow SOC
Mm.
analysts. Especially since I did so much phishing triage of like, okay, I have a system that works, let's all do this. And you don't hoard information. A lot of people think, oh, well, if I don't help anyone or don't tell anyone, that's job security for me. Not necessarily, because then you can also get in trouble
Mhm.
for not sharing how to do things and sharing processes. So yeah, that as a SOC analyst, it actually is very similar to being a librarian at a law firm, to be honest, because it's a lot of uh, many different things. So it's being a SOC analyst, you kind of need to be a Jack or Jill of all trades, because you kind of have to have your hands in a lot of different things. So then moving on, I went into more of a threat intelligence role after that. And
Mhm.
again, that's very crucial, that you need to know what's going on in the world. You need to prepare to write briefings. You need to prepare, uh, you know, di- you need to, prepare these briefings, and you might need to do some deeper dives of knowledge, to get some information. I'll say it very vaguely, but I was once asked to investigate a certain uh, group that there were some suspicions could impact security for the company I was working at. So it wasn't even necessarily security research. It was liberal arts research, trying to find information about this group. So um I don't know if people understand that, yeah, sometimes the research you do isn't technical. It's information to help fill in the story. So threat intelligence is a big one. Another thing that I want to mention is it's always good when you see these news events happening to go through your mind of what do I need to do next, and you need to have those written down if your department doesn't already. So, for example, when the attack on October 7th happened in Israel, my
Mm.
first thought was, what third party companies does our company have in Israel? That was my very first thought. And yeah, somebody was assigned to that. And it turns out there was like a dozen or so. And then in my mind, you kind of work backwards from there of like, okay, you know what, the first question would be, do you have any offices there? We already knew that we didn't. But so then I jumped to the vendors. But that's how you have to think, how does this impact us? Um, Let me see. Yeah, third parties are a big one. Something I used to love to do while I was at the New York Times is twice a day they would have these editorial meetings with all the journalists to go over what news stories were going to be dropped in the publication that day. And I always loved sitting on the morning call. Because sometimes, yeah, you would get a heads up on a news story that would be dropping, in the next half an hour. And and I don't think a lot of people understood why I was in those meetings, but you need to get a heads up of what was going to be in the publication in case that caused backlash or problems. So you need to be aware of like, okay, there's a story about, this group. I can give a really good example is one time a music editor, music writer for the paper was concerned about not a glowing review that he gave a Taylor Swift album, and he was scared of the Swifties, and wanted us to help him with that, and gave us a heads up when the article was going to drop, etc. So yeah, it's not always what you think it is, but it's still security. That was still privacy and security. It was just over a Taylor Swift album, which I don't even remember now which album it was, but anywho. And then lastly, for GRC, governance, regulatory, and compliance, I can't believe I actually remembered it. For some reason, I always forget. I always forget one of the letters. Okay,
Mhm.
so GRC is going to be a little different because it's not necessarily a breaking news type of thing. Legislative, regulatory things, they don't necessarily move quickly. But you still need to be mindful of the news and still do a check. Um, the news might contain something that, a regulation may change. Okay, so then you need to look into that. What is it going to change to? So GRC is definitely not necessarily time sensitive for things, but it does involve attention to detail because you're creating documents or modifying documents depending on the maturity of your GRC program. So I was actually in a position to work with almost from the ground up. There was kind of a skeleton GRC in place, so it was making it more robust, and that involves a lot of communication with other departments, understanding their needs. And you have a lot of IT departments that are understandably very protective of their department, so they really don't want the GRC or the security or the threat intelligence person coming around and poking at their stuff, or telling them what they did wrong or whatever. So you really need to approach it that you're a helper and a teammate, because you're not going to get anywhere if you come in with this condescending attitude of, I'm from GRC and I'm going to tell you how things are going to go. Need to have a little bit of humility and work with people. That's how you're really going to get things done.
Humility.
Yeah.
Mm.
So that
Mhm.
that's a just a glimpse into those three different roles that I've had.
That's a profound answer, Tracy. Thank you so much. Out of everything you said, it just clicked to my head that thinking is a major thing. You don't just wake up and enter the office. You enter your office and then you open the tools. You have to think on how relatable is the tool you are working with is to the task at hand. And also one thing that also stand out for me is the humility. For you to work successfully in cybersecurity, you are going to work with diverse set of people, and you need to have a relationship skill in order to maintain that. Thank you so much for that.
Sure.
I
I
really enjoyed that.
Yeah, if I may, I would just want to share a quick true story of when I was new at one of my jobs. We went as a department to go meet with this. I guess it was like an engineering department, and they wanted us to evaluate an open source software that they needed to use. And the security team right away was like, no, no, you can't do this. And they were really mean and rude to to the manager who was meeting with us. But I was new to my role, so I really just felt like I shouldn't say anything. But when the gentleman said, why do I feel like I'm being punished for asking security to weigh in on something, that was like a gut punch. I'm like, yeah, we're here to help. We're not supposed to be providing roadblocks necessarily. So that's when I spoke up, because I was like, okay, this is going off the rails. So I approached it with, getting clarity on why they couldn't use the what was deemed the safer paid version. And it was, well, the cost. And my next question was, because everything with business is who controls the purse strings, right? Who controls the money? So my next question to him was, you know, who can approve this cost? Who do we need to talk to tell them that this cost is an investment in security? And we got the name. Long story short, everything got pushed through because they weren't tying the I admire the engineers trying to find another way to solve their problem, but from a security standpoint, that was just
I,
going to open up more problems. So, I wrote a talk called "Empathy as a Service to Create a Culture of Security," because empathy is going to be a tool, to keep your company secure. If I hadn't spoken up, that department probably would have just used the insecure open source, and then maybe in 6 months a huge problem would have developed, and then
yeah.
it would have gone to finger pointing. Who let them have this, and what? So I felt compelled to speak up, and then, like, yeah, let's just cut through this. Like, who can do something about this? And yeah, I
And
want people to remember that, because even if you don't have the answers, ask questions to get to the answers.
ask the questions even if you don't have the answer. And I can actually relate with that story of yours. In a new environment, you don't know who is who, you don't
Yeah.
still understand the culture, you are still trying to blend in. I can understand the fear in your heart at that
Mhm.
moment, and I can understand the part that says, oh, but you know the right thing. Why don't you speak up? Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah,
Okay, so let's move to
professionally,
the
I couldn't stay
oh,
quiet. So I'm sorry. Next
mm.
question. Yeah.
No, no, no stress. But yeah, this is to every cybersecurity enthusiast out there. For your new role, whether you are experienced or you are not, but if you are in a new environment, don't be afraid to speak up, but have empathy and also understand how to communicate your idea correctly and appropriately. All right, that is going to help you a whole lot. Okay, so let's move to the next
Yes.
question. So this is going to be very interesting, right? So,
Yeah.
Tracy, tell me,
Okay.
what's the most intense or high pressure incident that you've had to respond to, and what was going through your mind, as
Oh
at that time?
boy. I have a good one for this, and I thought through all the different ones I could choose, and I think this is one I have talked about publicly before. So, but I don't know if everyone's heard the story. So, while I was working at the New York Times, I was on call. So I think it was about 3 in the afternoon on a Saturday, and my beeper goes up. Well, not an actual beeper, sorry, it's a phone app, but I get the alert. And of course, it was a sunny, Saturday afternoon. I was like, oh man, of course. But whatever, I go in and I look, and this was the situation. A reporter who was, in Hong Kong, who lived there professionally, for his job at the Times. Um, uh, it was 3 a.m. his time, and was awoken to his phone going crazy because basically he was being actively hacked at the moment. Yeah, so accounts, like he was getting all these like the email reset emails, like he was starting to get all these alerts about things changing and stuff. And so he, got in touch with the security team. And since I was on call, I was the one, who fielded that. So, the very first, well, first of all, I was nervous going into it. I was always nervous whenever I was summoned to, while on call, because yeah, you don't know what you're going to get. And I was scared of, like, do I know enough to help? And things like that. So I kind of lucked out because this was also very much an empathy type of situation.
Mm,
My first job, the way I saw it, is to calm him down. Right? He was
okay.
talking a mile a minute, understandably upset. I'm not, of course he's upset, but I wasn't going to be able to get information out of him if he was flustered. So
Yeah.
I had to, calm him down, like bring the conversation down, and not bombard him with questions. So, like, I would ask one question at a time, and also phrase, like, do you know if something, like, just try to make it sound more calming for him, not
Mm,
like placing blame or anything.
mm,
So I don't remember how long I was on the phone with him for, but I remember walking him through all these different steps, because again, you need to have these things in the time of a crisis. So this type
yeah.
of event, at the time, I just had a checklist in my head, but I later wrote it down. But it was even things like, does your SIM card have a pin? And wasn't sure. So, and, was too flustered. So I was like, what kind of phone do you have? I'll look it up, and I'll do that. So, um, yeah, just being able to get some information out of him, and then doing the heavy lifting myself, like finding out how to, put
Yeah.
a pin on, because I wasn't just gonna, like, I know that somebody may have just said to him, oh well, you're just gonna have to go look that up and do that. No, like, this guy's freaking out, right? Rightfully so. So yeah, I think I mean, I wish I had a more exciting ending to it, but he was very grateful. I didn't get off the phone until I knew that he was calm, right, and knew
Yeah.
that we had we as the company, or he had control of his accounts. It was, so maybe it was like an hour, I guess, and also I was well aware what time it was for him. So I kept saying, I was like, how are you feeling? Do you want to end now? And he
Mm,
wasn't going to feel comfortable until we, like, checked everything, and I'm like, that's fine, we'll go through, let's check everything, let's do this. So yeah, so that was a real case in empathy. I guess there was some technical aspects to it, but honestly it really was more like a person to person. And
yeah.
there were some technical aspects to it, but yeah, a lot of it was really just like, let's get the victim into the right frame of mind so that we can help them. And yeah, and then just followed up, the next day. He was very grateful. And yeah, so that's a very real situation, that journalists
Yeah.
have to deal with, and things. So yeah, it was, I think my nerves went away once I heard how upset he was. Like, it wasn't going to do us any good for both of us to to be upset. So
Yeah.
um So that's probably one of the most high pressure, interesting ones, because I knew, certain things we had to do were time sensitive, and
Yeah.
I'm going in through to make sure that, his accounts weren't
Mm.
altered in any way. So yeah, that was probably one of the most high pressure ones. And then to contrast with one of the low pressure ones, I one time was on duty on Halloween, and I really wanted to give out candy. And it was warm out here. I sat in my driveway with my laptop and kept an eye on the network as I was handing out Halloween candy. So that was the easiest on call I have ever had to do was Halloween
Yeah.
night, because
I
not
get you.
nothing happened. I was literally sitting there with my laptop and giving out candy. But then yeah, this one with the journalist,
Yeah.
that was probably one of the most high pressure ones I can
That
I can
that
share anyway.
I know, I know. All right. So you just said right. It's about
Yes.
personality as well. Personal
Mm-hmm.
character, which is empathy. And even when something of that high pressure happened, you don't just want to attack it hot. You don't want to attack it the way it comes to you. You want to calm your nerves down for a while. Even though we know in cybersecurity time counts, time is money, but
Mm-hmm.
then we don't want to rush into things and then get everything all scattered. Imagine you are talking to him, oh, do you know how you have spoiled my Saturday afternoon, something like that. It will have gone so west. So let's just move to the next question. I've
Yes.
got like two more. No, I lie. Okay, let me just say the two more core questions, and then I'm going to ask you our signature questions afterwards.
Great. Okay.
So, what's the biggest misconception people outside cybersecurity have about defenders? And maybe let's just, in particular, threat intelligence analysts. What do you
Sure.
think in a short answer, right? To say, oh, this is what people think about it.
So it's funny though. I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions people in infosec also have about defenders and threat intelligence. But
Yeah.
I'll start with the outside first. My experience is that people outside of our industry hear threat intelligence and they think spies. They think spy. I've actually had relatives be like, "Are you still at that spy job?" Like, it's not a spy job. So that's the one I've run into most often is they equate threat intelligence with spying, and
Mm,
it no, that's not. I think that also people outside in the industry think that threat intelligence specifically is just another IT function. Um,
mm.
and it's not. It really shouldn't even be in under IT necessarily. It
Under.
should be part of risk or
Yeah.
something else. Outside of the industry, I think whenever the word hacker comes up, people assume malicious hackers. Um, and like I know that a lot of people identify as a hacker. They'll say they're a hacker. I don't personally, and that's just me. So I don't really use the word hacker a lot, but I know if somebody will be like, oh, are you a hacker? I don't think the nuances between white hat, gray hat, black hat are really understood uh, by
Yeah.
the community, by the public.
Of course.
So yeah, it's like, well, there's malicious hackers. That's why I always try to say, like, use an adjective in front of it. Ethical hacker, malicious hacker, to make those lines clear.
Mm,
And then let's see. And then sometimes even like within the industry, I said I think there's misunderstanding. Um, I think that you need to be able to make connections between events and how it impacts your enterprise,
yeah.
because and I'm trying to think of an example. Oh, I know an example. So I worked in an enterprise environment in an industry that had nothing to do with banking or things like that. It was not banking, not finance. However,
Mm,
one of the threat intelligence would constantly send out to the team articles about cryptojacking, and
okay.
that wasn't like part of our threat model. And also at the time, it was happening like every day. So we didn't need an article about it every day. So it's, so it took me again speaking up and saying like, okay, like we get these cryptojacky articles all the time. What do they have to do with our threat model? And the
Yeah,
answer was the guy was, I don't know, they just, I don't want to say lazy, but just like saw headlines and grabbed them. And I'm like, no, you have to
like
pick headlines that
uh,
impact your department or your company. Sometimes people, that's the biggest thing I found of people within InfoSec is they seem to have a hard time making those connections. A quick
yeah,
example, when I was, at a pharmaceutical company, I found out that a international publisher was breached. And so, funny enough, I did know more about this because of my librarian background. But basically, when I took this publishing breach to my managers, they were like confused. They're like, "How does this impact us?" I'm like, "Yeah, we have researchers who read medical journals, scientific journals. We have
mm,
subscriptions, so that means that there's
mm,
emails and phone numbers and
yeah, that's correct.
forms of payment and stuff." And they were just like, they never even made that connection. So yes, I'm going to say is, yeah, my library experience absolutely directly impacted that. So much so that
Yeah,
I was actually able to call in a favor to a sales rep from that company that I knew back when I was a librarian. And I was like, I need a solid and, and did that. So yeah, I think there's a lot of misunderstandings in and
misconceptions. Yeah,
outside. Yeah.
yeah, and then sometimes they'll say, if you are not a hacker, oh, you are not doing anything serious. That's tag, especially for threat intel. They don't know that we do quite a lot of things. Yeah, that's a big one. So
Yeah.
moving on, right?
Yes.
We have questions. Two more questions before we go
Yes.
to the signatory questions.
Yeah.
Cybersecurity is often a 24/7 battlefield. You just on standby almost every time.
Hmm.
So I'm directing this to you personally to
Okay.
say, how do you deal with fatigue? How do you deal with stress? And how do you deal with alert overload? How do you deal with all of this practically?
Got it. So there's kind of two different answers here because some of these you need to do in your workplace, right? Um, but some of these things aren't really within your power to control. So I'll talk about that second. But first I'm going to talk about like in your personal life, like what you can do personally, what you do have control over. So I like to bake when I'm stressed.
Wow.
And I like to bring those baked goods into
Tracy,
the
baking
office.
is stressful. Oh
No,
my
it's not.
word.
Bacon's relaxing. So,
Huh?
I was the only woman in the sock, and the guys love my baked goods. They like once in a while, like if I hadn't brought one in a while, somebody'd be like, "You stressed out to make some banana bread?" I'm like, I was like, I guess I can be. um, so yeah, so that was a way for me to get my stress out by the act of baking, and then also just sharing my baked goods that were well received. That was helpful. um Again, when you're at home, hobbies are important. One thing I want to stress a lot to the newbies into this field, or if you're considering it, there are a lot of narratives from people who firmly agree that you should be constantly doing infosec even in your spare time, like, oh, when you're not working you should be home building
Spot on.
VMs and things like that.
Spot on.
Yeah, that's, and I at first I bought into that, and then it's a quick way to get burnout, right?
Yeah.
I understand that you need to skill build, but you really need to set boundaries. And
Mm,
this is my segue into what you can do in the office. So your boundaries may be, uh I used to watch the news constantly. I would, look at it for work and I'd look at it for personal. It's getting a little bit much to keep tabs on the news these
yeah.
days. So I try to limit, my intake of news. I try to make it, specific or for a certain amount of time, not leaving the TV on the news, for example. Um,
Mm.
so, and then how that translates to when you're in work and you might not really have control over things like the alert overload. Uh, there might be a tool to help with that.
Yeah.
Whether or not your department could afford it is another one. But, you know, if there's something that is overwhelming you, try to seek out some fixes, some options. Do your managers and skip levels, do they even know that there's a problem? They may not
Yeah.
know that there's a problem. So that's why boundaries are important of like, I feel myself getting completely overwhelmed because this alert situation is out of control and needs to be fixed. That needs to be a boundary of not staying quiet and suffering through it, but is there another way we can do this? Um,
Mm. Mm.
so yeah, having boundaries is important. um some people work in infosec 9 to 5. They don't go to conferences, they don't go to meetups, they don't build VMs at home or whatever, and that's fine. That's that There's nothing wrong with that. I
Yeah.
was always given a lot of feedback of like, oh, you don't want to be that person, you want to be involved with the community and stuff. Okay,
Mm.
but that's not for everyone. Um, I it depends on, what you want to do. It's fine if you just want to work 9 to 5 at your infosec job and have other hobbies. That's great. If you want to be super involved with the community and conferences and things, that's great too.
Yeah.
Just don't put anyone down for their choices, because
Yeah.
that's how they're going to deal. They might deal with fatigue and stress and alert overload by going to conferences.
Mm.
Everybody has a different way of dealing with it. So if someone says like,
Yeah.
I go home and build stuff, okay, that's great. You don't have to get any more details about it. You can just say, "That's
Yeah.
great for you. I play softball after work," or something like that. So,
Of
so
course.
that's my tips about handling boundaries are really important.
Of course. So to you, relieving your stress and fatigue, you found solace in baking. At
Yes.
some point in my life as well, I was always facing the screen. If I'm not doing screen, I'm always speaking at one event or the other. And I said to
Mhm.
myself, I don't want to continue this way. I need to find something else to to distract myself, but not like a distraction to a waste, but a distraction to a value. And guess
Mhm.
what? I learned crocheting. I
Nice. I love to
crochet now,
knit. Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
helps me relax. Once I'm done with work and I want to relax all the, a lot overload and all, I just pick up
Yeah.
my pin and my wool and then start doing something. And another thing I really love about your response to that question is setting boundaries.
Yeah.
Let work be work and let your life be your life. As a cybersecurity professional, you want to be everywhere. You want to upskill, you want to grab certification, you want to do one training or the other, but you still have a life to live. That's the
Yes.
whole essence of what Tracy is trying to tell us in here. Okay, back to the last question
Yes.
right now before my two signatory questions. If you could change one thing, one thing about how organizations treat their security teams, what would that be? And what is the status right now? Has it changed? And why has it changed?
Oh, I don't think we have enough time for me to answer all of. No, I'm just kidding. There's a lot
Yeah,
of a
I
lot of problems. No,
know. You can
I have one
just
thing.
shorten it.
Yep, yeah, one thing. So this is my thought of what needs to be changed and not necessarily and hasn't necessarily been changed yet. Diversity of thought solves problems. Now,
Mm,
when I say diversity, I'm talking, it's not saying race is superficial. Diversity
okay.
goes beyond that. Take me for example, liberal arts undergrad with a library science master's degree.
Mm,
That's diversity, having diversity of thought. That's why I like to say that phrase that way. um, you know because there's a lot of infosec folks who have a high school diploma and nothing else, but they have all this great, all this other great experience. Other
yeah.
folks like myself might have a lot of degrees. you know, different college majors, different work experiences, different life experiences. um, I know a former manager of mine told me that he was always very curious about what hobbies people had that he interviewed, and that he was a little suspicious of people who didn't have hobbies. You know, he just didn't think that was healthy, you know, and for the reasons that I mentioned before. But the fact that he actually would use that as part of a decision making for a role, I thought was very interesting. So I believe that diversity of thought solves problems. There were so many times in the SOC where, I'll just say it, something liberal artsy, you know, something
Yeah.
non-technical came up, and
Mhm.
the rest of the team had no idea what it was. And it was me, you know, being like, well, that's, you know, that's what this is, or this is from history, or that's that. So I would like to see, you know, more diversity on teams, and
Mm.
have that be all kinds of stuff. Now obviously you still want to have, you know, folks from, you know, different ethnic backgrounds, I believe, because I believe that further contributes
Yeah.
to diversity solving problems. But yeah, everybody's looking for these, you know, these unicorns. And it's like you have all these squirrels that running around the base of the tree, but you're off trying to find some unicorn that doesn't exist. Like, why don't you grab one of those squirrels trying to, you know, to
Yeah.
get a nut and do work, rather than this unicorn that doesn't exist. So yeah,
Mm.
more squirrels, less unicorns.
Yeah, I get you. I get you. Thank you so much for that.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's wrap up my main questions.
Yes.
So in one sentence, excuse me, in one sentence, what human impact do you want people to remember you for in cybersecurity?
I'd like to be remembered as someone who was a good mentor and helped people with their careers and with their learning and professional development. I take the point of view that I am planting trees under whose shade I'll never rest. I want to leave information security a better place than when I entered, and that's what I hope to be remembered for.
Oh, perfect. That's awesome. And the last one now. I mean the
Yes.
last. So you've
Last,
joined
last.
this yeah this show, and I'm so grateful that you honored my invitation, and
Mhm.
you are here sharing, you know, practical tips on how to live life beyond, even beyond cybersecurity. Okay, so I want you to nominate a voice that will listen to this podcast, and we say, okay, I also want to be heard. I want my voice to be heard. All right, so
Mhm.
nominate a voice.
I proudly nominate my friend Mary Galloway. She is just a force to be reckoned with. She currently leads the Women's Society of Cyber Jitsu, and has been, you know, dedicated to upskilling women and other, you know, and members of underrepresented groups, to, you know, give them tech skills, you know, to help with their careers. And I've known her for about 10, 11 years uh,
Ooh,
by now. And it's, you know, it's great to have professional, you know, allies and friends, you know,
yeah.
because they understand what's going on, and you can also put your heads together to problem solve. But um, Mary is phenomenal, and I would love, you know, for her to be on your show next.
Okay, so Mary, you are a phenomenal woman, and I am coming next for you. So get ready to come to this show with me to share your own voice. Let people hear you and know what you have been doing, and then how you have been upholding the human pillar of cybersecurity. All right, this brings us to the end of the show. Tracy, I am super grateful and I'm honored that you come to the show with me. I'm going to bring you back, whether you like it or not. You are coming back to the show because it's we've got a lot of gist to talk about, a lot of things, you
Yeah.
know. So definitely, I'll come back to your calendar. I'll knock, and then I know you will surely open the door. All right, thank you so much for joining, and have a wonderful day. You know, wherever you are right now, have a good one. All right, people. It's been a whole lot of conversation with phenomenal Tracy. It's been a wholesome talk, a wholesome conversation. I am going away with so many tips. I'm going away with knowing your boundaries. I'm going away with empathy. Wherever you are, you need to have empathy, no matter how the pressure. I'm also going out um with building the soft skills. I mean, the research. It's not all about the tools, and that's one of the things. The reason why this podcast is existing. All right, so we just want to explore beyond the tools, beyond the techniques, beyond the codes and the firewall of this world. All right, so this brings us to the end of this episode tagged Inside the Trench, what cybersecurity looks like at the front line. I'm glad that you joined us today. Wherever you're listening, please do come back again. We will be having this new episode every 2 weeks. So that means two times in a month. Just know that we'll be dropping a new episode. I am excited about this journey, and let's see what we're going to make up from here. I believe there's going to be a threat, a security culture change. I believe that many people will get tips on how to improve themselves even at work. I believe that you will be able to pick one or two lessons that you will be able to deploy in your real life situation. All right, I remain your host, Jumi. Have a wonderful day wherever you're watching or listening to me right now. Thank you so much. See you in the next episode.